In this video, we're going to go through a couple of examples on calculating the equation of a straight line. So these are going to be basic examples, right? So in your, exam, you're probably going to get more complex questions, but this is just to drive home the concepts that we talked about in the first introduction video. So yeah, right. So let's go through the first example. It says, find the equation of a straight line which passes through points -4 and 1. So that's your first point. And it also passes through the point 8 and -4. Right. So we said that in order for us to find the equation of a straight line, which follows the formula y is equal to mx plus c, the most important thing is to start off by finding our gradient. Right. Our gradient is going to be our m. Right. This is the first thing that we always just need to try to find. So we use the gradient equation. The gradient equation says your gradient is the difference in your y's divided by the difference in your x's. All right. So we have to pick a point that has y2 and x2 and then y1 and x1. So of the 2 points that we're given, we have to pick a point 1 and a point 2. So I'm going to just pick randomly because it really ultimately doesn't matter which one your point 1 is and which one your point 2 is. So we're going to make this point 1, which means that's x1 and that's y1. And we're going to make this point 2, which means that's x2 and that's y2, right? So this equation, this gradient is going to end up being y2 minus y1, which is -4 minus 1. And then you're going to divide that by the difference in the x's. The difference in the x's, remember we said in the first video, if you start with this on top, that means at the bottom you're going to have to start with this one, right? So if we start with -4, at the bottom we have to start with its pair, which is the 8, right? So as long as you're consistent with that, it doesn't really matter which one your point 1 was and which one your point 2 was. So you're going to make the bottom becomes the difference in the x's, which is x minus -4. Right, so that means the top is -4 minus 1. This gives us -5. The bottom becomes 8 minus -4, which is 8 plus 4. That's going to be 12. So -5 over 12. You can try to switch these on top. It doesn't really, again, it does not matter because it could be 1 minus -4 divided by -4 minus 8, which becomes +5 divided by -12, which is going to give you -5 over 12 anyway. So it doesn't matter which one your point 1 is, which one your point 2 is, as long as you stay consistent with which one you start with. Okay, cool. So now we have our gradient. Perfect. That's usually the biggest step that we need to accomplish here. So we now have m is equal to -5 over 12. Perfect. Right, so the next step that we need to follow here is to then pick a point, because our equation can now be written as y is equal to mx, which since we know m, we can just rewrite this as y is equal to -5 over 12x plus c. So now the next question is, what is the c, right? How do you find c? And in order for us to calculate c, what we can do is we can pick one of the 2 points, whether it's this one, that one, it doesn't really matter. It should give you to the same, it should bring you to the same answer. Pick a point and you're going to plug in the y into the y equation and the x into the into the x position. So if I pick this point, that means my equation becomes, so let's just write this as at x is equal to, at point, what was the point? -4 and 1. This equation becomes y is equal to 1. That's is equal to -5 over 12. And then you're going to replace your x value with the x value for that point. So you replace the y value with the y value of the point. And you also replace your x with the x value of the point. That's -4. And then plus c. And then all we need to do is make c the subject of the formula. So you still have a 1 on the side that's equal to -5 over 12 multiplied by -4. The negatives are actually going to cancel. So let's just deal with that now, right? 4 goes into itself once. It goes into 12 3 times. So we're left with 5 over 3 over here. That's going to be plus c. And then we're going to move the 5 over 3 to the other side. And when it crosses over the equal sign, its sign changes to negative. So now you have 1 minus 5 over 3 is equal to c, right? Which means c is equal to 5 over 3 is 1 2/3. Subtract, 1 minus that. You can always just throw it into your calculator. I think it should give you negative 2 over 3. But just to make sure, let's just put that into our calculators. It is negative 2/3. So that means now we have our c value. That's perfect. Therefore, our final equation is actually y is equal to negative 5 over 4, 5 over 12, because remember that was our m. It's mx plus c, which is plus negative 2 over 3, which you can rewrite as y is equal to negative 5 over 12 x minus, because positive and a negative becomes negative, minus 2 over 3. So we can write it in this form. Or usually we don't like denominators in our equation, so we can look for the common denominator. We have two denominators, which is 12 and 3. What is the common multiple between those two? It's going to be 12. So you can multiply this by 12, right? So that 3 goes into itself once, and then it goes into 12 4 times. But once you multiply 1 by 12, you have to multiply every single expression by 12. These 12s are going to cancel. So your equation actually becomes 12y is equal to negative 5x minus 2 times 4 becomes 8. All right, so you can write it like this, or you can write it everything on one side. So 12y, I'm going to take this to the other side, which becomes positive 5x. I'm going to take that to that side, which becomes positive 8. That's equal to 0. So you're going to find your equation in different forms like this, right? So maybe they've prettified it like we've done here. So just be careful when you're interpreting graphs in this section, because if I give you the equation in this form and I ask you to find the gradient, right? The gradient is not going to be negative 5. You're not just going to jump to whatever's attached to x. You have to first make sure that it's in this form, or at least when it was here, it was 1, y is equal to negative 5 or 12x minus 2/3, right? It has to be in this form for us to directly interpret what the gradient is and what the y-intercept is. If you're given it in this form at first, you have to first make y the subject of the formula. So we have to be able to bounce between different forms. And I think we said this in the last video, but just to emphasize, we need to be able to do that. Also, we need to be able to read the question. If the question says, write it in the form ay plus bx plus c is equal to 0, it means we need to do all of the stuff that we've done here. Okay, cool. Let's go to the second example. Right, the second example says, calculate the equation of a straight line which has gradient negative 1/2 and passes through the point negative 4 and 2. So we talked in our introduction video about the two ways that we can find the gradient of a point. We can always do the same thing that we've done here, right? Where we have two points to calculate the gradient, and then once we do that, we plug and play. Or if you've already been given the gradient, you can just start off with plugging and playing from the jump, right? Where you say, okay, I already have my m. In order to calculate my c, I just put the y and the x in and then calculate. Since we've already done that in the first example, we are going to go through another method, right? Just for, if you prefer another method, which is the method where we said we have the equation m multiplied by x minus x1 is equal to y minus y1, right? Ooh, okay, sorry about that. This equation, so we talked about how to derive this equation in the last video, so I'm not going to get into that. However, all we need to do in this case is to say, okay, do I have my gradient? Yes, I do. And do I have a point which has an x value and a y value? This other x which doesn't have a number, this other x and this other y, the ones that don't have a number are just general x's and y's. So all we need to do is to plug our x1, our y1, and our m into this equation, and we have our formula. So let's just do that, right? So that becomes m is negative 1/2. So it's going to be negative 1/2 multiplied by x minus the x1 value. Remember, on this point, you start off with your x, and then you have your y. So since we only have one point, our x is negative 4. And then that's going to be y minus your y1, which is 2. And all we need to do now is to simplify the equation and make sure we have y as the subject of the formula. So that's going to be negative a half multiplied by x, and then negative times negative is positive, so that's x plus 4. That's equal to y minus 2. And then what we're going to do is, let's just, I'm just going to multiply in. So multiply negative a half times x, because remember this half is going to multiply into the bracket, and since it's addition, it's going to multiply each term separately. So that's going to be negative a half times x, which is negative a half x. Negative a half times 4 gives you negative 2. That's equal to y minus 2. And then to make y the subject of the formula, you're going to take this negative 2 to the other side, and it becomes positive. So we have negative a half x minus 2 plus 2 is equal to y. Negative 2 plus 2 gives you 0, right? So that's going to be negative a half of x is equal to y. Or you can flip it around and say y is equal to negative a half x. You can write this as plus 0 just to show that our gradient is still negative a half. Our y-intercept is 0. So this graph looks like something like this, where the gradient is negative, which means as we're moving right, it's going down, but it also crosses over at the y-intercept at the origin because your y-intercept is 0, right? So it crosses the y-axis at y is equal to 0. So this is what the graph basically looks like. All right, so that's how you do. So this is the other method. You could have done the first method that we did, where we just say, okay, we have our equation y is equal to mx plus c, right? If we already been given the gradient, which is negative a half, we can just plug in this point into the equation. So x is equal to negative 4, y is equal to 2, right? And then that's plus c. Make c the subject of the formula. So that's negative a half times negative 4 gives you positive 2. Plus c, you take the 2 to the other side. That's 2 minus 2. So your c is equal to 0. So your y equation becomes y is equal to negative a half x plus c, which is 0. So it depends on which method you prefer, honestly. But the syllabus does require you to know both. So we have covered both. Right? So hopefully this kind of makes sense. Now, we are going to get into this a little bit deeper, right? But as long as your foundation is good on calculating the equations of straight lines, because now we're going to start introducing parallel lines, perpendicular lines, right? We're going to start doing lengths of lines, midpoints, and all of these different things before we start to get into circles. So I hope for now this makes sense. If this was boring, then fantastic, because boring means you know what's happening, right? You're not confused. So hopefully this made sense and it wasn't confusing, and I'll see you in the next video.